for anybody joining, we're just waiting a few minutes for people to join, and we'll make a start in a minute. Cool. Right, good to go. Okay, great. Well, hello, good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Future Speaks South Scotland. This event's been organised by two organisations, Teach the Future, which is a group of students campaigning for climate education, and Sustainability Partnerships, which are connecting the politicians. I'm Finlay Asher, and I'm the chair of this event. I'm the founder of Green Sky Thinking. It's a social media platform that's exploring the topic of sustainable aviation. This event is part of 8 events that are taking place across the 8 electoral regions of Scotland in the run-up to the Scottish Parliament elections that are taking place in Scotland in May. It's the second event, with one happening every 2 weeks, and another, so we've had one 2 weeks ago in Lothian, we've got another 6 to come after this one. So this evening, we're going to be focusing on the topic of the climate and ecological emergency and political promises for how we respond to that in Scotland. This is going to be a massive year for climate action in Scotland. Hopefully you're all aware, in November this year, our country will host the UN Climate Change Conference, or Conference of Parties, aka the COP26 in Glasgow. The eyes of the world will be on the UK, and they'll be on Scotland to facilitate those negotiations and to lead from the front in terms of a developed country with real ambition. So separately, Scottish Parliament elections are taking place in May. This will provide an opportunity for Scots to question political candidates about their climate ambition. Climate change will obviously affect young people more than anybody else. And in Scotland, the great thing is that anybody over the age of 16 is eligible to vote in the elections. So with this event, we've given young voters a platform to meet with local MSP candidates from each political party and quiz them about their climate promises. We've got 3 high school pupils and eligible voters with us today, Emily, Ruby and Keris, who I'll introduce in a second. They'll be asking questions sent in by young people throughout the region. We'll start by introducing our high school panelists, and then we'll go around and introduce each politician. So yeah, let's start. Hopefully we've got the 3 panelists on the line. Can we start with Emily? Are you able to introduce yourself?
Hello, I'm Emily McIntyre and I'm an S6 student at Peebles High School. I'm passionate about climate action because I believe the consequences of climate change will be devastating and far-reaching, but are still preventable. As a member of Fridays for Future Scottish Borders, I've taken part in many strikes. And as a member of Peebles High School Eco Committee, I worked tirelessly to help Peebles High School become one of the first plastic bottle-free schools in Scotland.
Great, thanks very much. And Ruby, you going to go next?
Hi, I'm Ruby, I'm 17 and I also go to Peebles High School. I'm a member of Fridays for Future Scottish Borders, and I'm also a member of the Scottish Borders Council Youth Ambassador for Sustainability, which I joined when I first started learning about climate change and the potential risk it will have for future generations.
Thank you. Just for reference, Ruby, you're coming through a little bit slow, so you might need to turn your video off, but we'll just watch and see how that goes. Could hear you though. Keris, you able to go next?
Hi, my name is Keris Goff. I'm 17 and I'm from Langham in Dumfries and Galloway. I'm a volunteer at Fridays for Future Scotland and Teach the Future, as well as a co-founder of my school's eco group.
Perfect. So we'll now go and just have a quick intro with each of the politicians. So we'll go around in alphabetical order, and we'll start with Katrina from the Lib Dems.
Thanks, Finlay. I'm Katrina Bhatia. I'm standing for the Scottish Liberal Democrats in the south of Scotland list. I've lived in the Borders for the past 20 years and grew up in the Borders. I have 4 children who are now young adults. So the climate crisis is very much a topic of conversation within our household. And I think it's one of those issues which crosses across party politics. It's something which I think politicians from all political parties need to put at the top of their agenda, and I think thankfully are doing so. So look forward to the discussion and questions this evening.
Perfect. Right, next up we've got Claudia Beamish from Labour. Just need to unmute yourself. There you go.
That's most of my few seconds gone. So anyway, I'll be quick. I'm Claudia Beamish, and I'm the Scottish Labour Party's Shadow Cabinet Secretary for Climate Change, Land Reform, I stress, and Environment. And I'm really pleased to be here tonight. I'm also a member of the Co-op Parliamentary Group, which I think is really important in terms of everyone working together on co-op models across climate issues such as flooding, and with the Tweed Forum and a whole load of different things. I used to be a primary teacher and an eco schools coordinator, and I'm really looking forward to the discussions about how the climate and ecological crises and emergencies can be right at the heart of everything in the curriculum and in all our policies as well. And I agree with Katrina that a lot of it is cross-party, but obviously we've got our own priorities, and we'll be highlighting those tonight. And I hope there are a lot of synergies so that whoever's in the next Parliament can take them forward. Thanks.
Yeah, so do I. Okay, so Finlay Carson from the Conservatives, you're up next.
Good evening, everybody. Delighted to be with you. I'm Finlay Carson. I'm the MSP for Galloway and West Dumfries. I'm standing again for that constituency at the elections in May. Currently, I'm the Shadow Minister for Natural Environment and COP26 for the Scottish Conservatives, and I'm the Deputy Convener of the Environment, Climate Change and Land Reform Committee. My background, I used to be a farmer, so I've lived and still live in the middle of the countryside, and farming and the rural landscape, the environment has been very part of my life, for a long time. I have a 23-year-old son, a 22-year-old daughter, a 20-month-year-old daughter, and a 4-month-old son. So I've got children that have somewhat been through school and are experiencing some of the issues with climate change as they're grown older. And I've also got 2 very small children that will face the consequences going forward if we don't get this right. So we've got a lot of responsibility on our shoulders. As Claudia says, thankfully, most of this is consensual. It's all very much something that all parties are driving for. And that's the way our committee works in Parliament, and look forward to working to achieve some of the outcomes we see in the next session. Thank you.
Great, thanks. Okay, so Mary McCallan next from the SNP.
Thanks, Finlay. Hi, everyone. My name's Mary McCallan. I'm the SNP's candidate for Clydesdale, where I grew up. I was a lawyer working in renewable energy, but more recently, I was appointed as the First Minister's Special Advisor in Climate, Environment and Land Reform. I'm also a co-founder of a human rights organisation called Reblaw Scotland. So I'm really delighted to be here and looking forward to the discussion.
Great, thanks. Good to have so many land reform experts on board. Should be interesting. So next up, Laura Moody from the Green Party.
Hi, I'm Laura Moody. I'm the Scottish Green Party candidate for the South Scotland region and the Galloway and West Dumfries constituency. I'm a mum of 4, a smallholder, a community organiser, and I work as the coordinator for Mid Steeple Quarter, which is a pioneering community-led regeneration project that will see the High Street of Dumfries redeveloped as a community-owned, car-free, low-carbon neighbourhood with a mix of housing, retail and creative spaces.
Thanks, thank you. Okay, so just to explain how we're going to run the agenda tonight, the young panelists will take it in turns to ask some pre-prepared questions. We'll then give each of the politicians a chance to respond one by one. and then we'll return to the high school people for any response. Each politician should aim to answer the question in about 1 minute. There'll be a timer alarm that goes off after 90 seconds if you're overrunning, and we'll ask you to stop at that point so that we can move on. This event will be running until 6:30. So if we get to the end of those pre-prepared questions and we still have time, we'll then move on to any good live Q&A questions that are coming in via the Q&A box at the bottom. So if you're thinking of something, you'd really like something answered and you think you've got a good question, please put it in there, and our tech team will be sorting through those and they'll pass any good ones on to me for the end. So yeah, we'll finish by then at the end allowing our high school panelists to make a closing statement each before wrapping up. Okay, so without further ado, what we'll do is we'll start with Keris, who has the first question on recycling. Keris, are you able to answer that? Ask the question, please.
Yeah. So Dumfries and Galloway is ranked 28th out of 32 Scottish councils for recycling. Millions of pounds was wasted by the Dumfries and Galloway Council on an eco-deco plant that which was later, that money was like wasted on, yeah, sorry, I lost my words there. This does not fill young people with confidence that politicians are trying to do the right thing. How would you improve recycling not only across south of Scotland, but across the whole of Scotland?
Great, thank you. So we'll start with Katrina on this one.
Thanks, Finlay, and thanks for the question, Keris. Yeah, I think, I mean, I was a member of Scottish Borders Council for 14 years, and one of the reasons I actually joined the council was because I didn't feel that their waste strategy was sufficiently bold or sufficiently clear. And I think that this has been a problem for councils for many years because the Scottish Government has changed direction, and that's not a political point, it's just of different views. So they've changed the strategy, and I think that's why Dumfries and Galloway ended up with their redundant eco-deco plant, because they were actually conforming with what was there back in 2003. I would slightly turn it on its head and say the first thing we need to prioritise is reducing waste. And I think we focus too much on how do we increase our recycling and not enough of how do we actually reduce our waste. So I think that the countries that are most successful have a polluter pays type approach. So Germany, for example, have done that for a long time. They have sort of vending machines where you can actually take back your plastics and get money back. And I think as well as having strong sort of government targets, it's also incredibly important to incentivize the public to take part and to share in trying to achieve those recycling targets. And Wales, for example, has done very well in their recycling targets. So we've got some good examples locally that we can push. But I think actually reducing waste and banning things like single-use plastics much sooner than is currently being proposed are the kind of measures that I think we should be looking at, rather than talking about what colours of bins we should put out on each day, because the less waste we produce, the less we will have to deal with the recycling problem.
Cool, that's bag on 90 seconds. So thank you. We'll move on to Claudia. Remember to take yourself off mute if possible.
Yeah.
There you go.
Thanks very much, Finlay. And I think it's really fundamental to get right to the heart of what this is. And I think that Zero Waste Scotland has done an incredible amount of work on looking at the waste hierarchy and about where we should be going with all this. And while I agree that reducing our waste is important, I think also what we do with what we have used and stop calling it waste is really, really vital, that we look at where it can go. And I mean, if I use a quick example of what's called fast fashion these days, and it's I just found a statistic today that in the UK, across the UK, an estimated 140 million worth of used clothes goes to landfill in the UK every year, which is a figure I could hardly believe. But I mean, I've visited, which some of you may know of as well, a group in East Lothian in Dunbar, who actually, as part of the community, get people to take their clothes that they don't want anymore, and then others can use them. And it's the same with school uniforms and everything. You know, I think we need a circular economy bill, which has been delayed, understandably, because of COVID. I think we need to develop the skills for remanufacturing. There's a great example just down the road from me. There's I live rural, and there's a whole load of plastic covered bales, and there's a company not that far from where Finn is, I think, Solway Recycling, that's actually making them into fences and decking and things. So there's all sorts of
I think
things.
that's time.
And let's go for
Cool,
it.
thank you. Yeah, thank you. So moving on to Finlay Carson.
Unmute. Yeah, I'll touch on the Eco-Deco first, because that was part of the question. The Eco-Deco at the time was a fantastic facility. It was leading in Scotland in its ability to separate waste out. The problem is we had a change in legislation which required consumers to separate their waste at the curbside. So it was up to us to separate cans and cardboard and food waste on the curbside. And that was a piece of legislation that the government brought in. But up to then, the Eco-Deco actually did quite well. It took out lots of separate waste and put them into different paths, and there was a lot of waste was classified as recycled and not recycled, and a lot of it was just the way it was accounted for. Nowadays, I'm pleased that Eco-Deco isn't the default, and that people actually have to think about what they're throwing away. In Newton Stewart, where I lived up until just last week, we had 3 bins, so I was very conscious about what I was throwing away, plastics and cardboard. Now in Borg, we have 1 single bin, and I feel terrible because all our waste goes into 1 bin. And it just feels wrong, and I get a bit OCD about separating things out. So we need to accelerate that so people can actually see what they're throwing out. You know, Claudia touched on the way forward. We must make sure that we're conscious about what we're throwing away and reuse rather than actually have to be forced to recycle. And I think that's the way forward. I think I've run out of time.
Yeah, you have done. Yeah, thanks. So we'll move on to Mary next.
Thanks, Finlay. So I think a bit of context is important. In Scotland, we have the most ambitious framework for emissions reduction in the world set by our Parliament, 75% by 2030, net zero by 2045. And this is brilliant, but it means we have a huge amount of work to do. And it means we have to change every aspect of our economy and society. And the reason that I say that in the context of the question of waste is because recycling is something that we can all do every single day to make a difference. And it helps you get over that feeling that sometimes, you know, you're just one person and you can't make a difference. So in the SNP, we want to build a truly circular economy where we reuse, recycle, and we don't waste. One of the things I've been really proud to work on this year is our deposit return scheme, which will improve recycling and reduce harmful litter on our beaches and our seas and our streets. The SNP was also the first country to ban single-use cotton buds and has one of the most ambitious targets for reducing food waste in Europe. So we're determined to tackle this, and our recent commitment to keeping pace with the EU is really important in all of this, because the EU have really driven forward a lot of action in waste and in the environment generally, and I'm really pleased that Scotland has made a commitment to keep pace with them despite Brexit.
Great, thank you. Thanks for staying within time as well. Cool. So move on to the final one from Laura.
Thanks. I was actually quite glad to be last to answer this question, because if there's one question I get asked a lot as a Green, it's about recycling, and it massively frustrates me because, as has been pointed out, recycling is the worst of the options in terms of waste, other than landfill and incineration. It should be the last thing we're thinking about, and we should be looking much more at reducing and reusing. All government can be responsible for that, from local government upwards. Reducing or banning single-use plastics should be a priority right now, especially since COVID has slightly set us back on that. And to pick up on what Mary said about European legislation, lots of the Green MEPs in Europe are doing great work on looking at consumer protections to reduce waste. So looking at inbuilt obsolescence, looking at the right to repair, looking at making sure manufacturers aren't producing goods that have a huge amount of waste built in unnecessarily. As several parents of 4 here will all be familiar with pregnancy tests, and that's a great example of how we've got companies making profits by producing these massively over-engineered plastic and component and circuit board and battery packs for what is essentially a strip of paper. So we really need to look at legislation that goes to companies, goes to industry and says this isn't acceptable anymore. We have to stop producing this needless waste.
Perfect. Thanks very much. So let's return to Keris. Just interested, you've heard all 5 of them speak. What have you got any thoughts on that?
First of all, thank you all for giving such clear answers. I think everyone does have really good points to make. Yes, we need to reduce the amount of single-use plastics we produce in the first place. But I think it's important to remember that in terms of recycling, it's not something that everyone can do because it's not always accessible. I live in a very rural community and there's only a couple of recycling bins here, but they're not for all forms of recycling, just for basic tins and cardboard. We don't have the plastic recycling facilities here. And if we want to recycle, we have to actually take our rubbish and drive it somewhere in order to recycle. So improving recycling has to also bring into account the fact that for people in rural areas, it's not very easy and it has to be made accessible in order for people to do it regularly.
Yeah. So next we're going to move on to Ruby. And she's going to ask the second question.
Right, thank you. The next question is about agriculture. And does climate change need to reduce our environmental impact of our diet? This is a sensitive issue as livestock farming has a really high climate impact, but it's also a major industry in south of Scotland. However, farming can have a positive impact on the planet through practices such as regenerative farming. How would you encourage and support farmers in South Scotland to transition to more sustainable farming practices to ensure that they become widespread?
So we're having a bit of audio problem with you there, Ruby. Are we able to put the question? So we put the question into the chat, so everyone can see it, just in case you were struggling there. So to tackle climate change, we need to reduce the environmental impact of our diets. It's obviously a sensitive issue as livestock farming has a high climate impact, but it's also a major industry in South Scotland. Farmers are stewards of the land. They need to be supported by the government through the transition to more sustainable practices, such as regenerative farming. That involves improving carbon content of soil and encouraging biodiversity on the land. So how would you encourage and support farmers in South Scotland to adopt those practices and ensure they become widespread? This time we're going to start with Claudia, if that's okay.
Thanks very much. This is a really important question. And as someone who lives in rural South Scotland, I'm very passionate about these issues. I happen to be an organic gardener, and I think that organic farming has its place in the future. But I want to stress right at the start of this answer that I think what's really important is that farmers and land managers across the South and in Scotland more widely, in my experience, both as a politician and simply living in the country, it's really clear that almost all farmers want to do what is right. And I think one of the most important things is for farmers to be able to have a really good advisory service, because if you're busy and you're isolated and you're working on your farm with your family and you have all the other responsibilities, it's very difficult to find out how to carbon test your soil or the things that have been highlighted in the question. I think it's important that we have an ecosystems approach to the environment and climate change crises. And I think that it's absolutely integral. I think the new pilots must be really, for giving support to farmers, must be really clear and really helpful and supportive so that people can fit them to their own geography and their own requirements in terms of scale of farm and a whole range of other things. Less meat, possibly, but certainly using the land in ways that enable us to have agroforestry as well, and shade for animals, and
Thanks.
and stop.
Just to say your time's up there. Could we move on to
Okay.
Can we move on to Finlay? Thank you.
Thank you, Finlay. Yeah, I think we need to recognise that farming in the UK is well in advance of farming elsewhere and in the world, and already we have emissions which are something to be proud of. We probably, when it comes to meat production, in some cases we're 50% less contributing to climate change. But our farmers are really willing to do more, and they recognise that. As a farmer, or a farmer in my past life, that's something that we were very conscious of. We are, after all, the stewards of the countryside, and the reason we've got beautiful countryside is much to do with the way it's been farmed over the centuries. So we do need farmers to have support. They need to have clear guidelines. Up to now, even the chair of the Climate Change Committee, Chris Stark, has been very critical of the Scottish SNP government for not making clear what farmers should be expected to do. And they're all sitting there waiting to get ready with looking at how they can preserve and improve the soil, and that's maybe not cultivating in the way we've done in the past. They're looking at how we can protect peatlands, how, as Claudia said, we can use broadleaf native species of trees to create shelter belts and things like that. And there's lots of technology to do with rumination. So changing the diet of cows can actually reduce the methane output, which is a major factor in global warming. So we've got farmers all there ready to go. Lots of ideas about scrappage schemes for old equipment and so on. So we just need the government to get the finger out and tell us how we're going to move forward.
Okay, thanks. And Mary's the next.
Thanks, Finlay. So yeah, there are emissions associated with food production, just as there are with transport, energy, heating our homes, and we absolutely have to reduce these. But I think, like Claudia and Finlay, my experience tells me that Scottish farmers, and particularly young farmers, are already rising to the challenge and are keen to do more. In Scotland, we produce food that has an international reputation for high quality and good animal welfare standards. And I think that as a society, if you agree you're going to eat meat, that's the best that you can hope for. So Finlay said it, the way we farm here is not really comparable to these terrible practices that we see in the US and in Brazil, where great swathes of land are cleared for thousands of animals. So I think our challenge is to ensure that we do reduce greenhouse gas emissions from agriculture, but in a way that still allows our industry to produce that high quality and healthy food. So I want to see them supported to take up low carbon practices, like soil testing has been mentioned, organics, creating spaces for biodiversity to flourish. And I do think we need to build environmental outcomes into farming payments, but in a way that also supports food production. And if I've got time, Finlay, I just want to mention nature-based solutions to climate change. We've got ample opportunity for that. Tree planting, peatland restoration, farmers and crofters can seriously help us to deploy that. We can reduce emissions, we can help biodiversity and create good green jobs, particularly for our young people.
Okay, thanks. And Laura is next.
Yep, I'm really glad to hear Peat get a mention there, because it's something I've been battling locally, only to discover that part of the reason the peat is needed is because Forestry England is buying the peat to plant trees to address England's climate goals, which is somewhat frustrating. And there's no point putting millions into restoring peatland if we're still allowing people to dig up and harvest it. So I'd really like to see some more concrete action happening there. As the others said, farmers and farm workers are absolutely on the front line of climate change. In wealthy countries like ours, they're likely to be one of the most affected sectors, and that will be devastating for rural communities and the rural economy, which relies on those jobs. We've already seen the implications of climate change here in terms of flooding and drought. A lot of farmers around here really struggled in 2019 when we had a really dry spring, and it meant they couldn't get enough silage in for the winter. So they had a massive increase in their costs to buy in silage to feed their animals. So farmers really do want to do the right things, but they're massively hampered by ever-changing legislation, ever-tightening margins. Food is not valued. We have the big supermarkets who really do dominate the market and make it very hard to get local foods to local people. I'd really like to see farmers treated as the kind of integral part of the community and the economy that they are, in the same way that doctors are. Nutrition and health and food are all linked. And there are some really great pioneers just down the road from me. We have the Ethical Dairy at Rainton Farm, who are pioneering keeping their calves with the cows for longer and have an anaerobic digester. But all this needs to be built in at every layer of government. I'm particularly concerned in terms of planning legislation. In Dumfries and Galloway, 23 planning applications have gone through for slurry tanks and lagoons just in this year. That's a huge amount of emissions and very little oversight in terms of covering and maintaining that. So yeah, sorry, I ran on.
That's okay. Thank you. Katrina, you're last. Thanks.
Thanks very much. I think it's important to realise that although the agricultural industry in the south of Scotland is huge, and across Scotland itself, actually the quality of our land for agriculture is not great, and certainly a lot of it had less favoured area status under the EU regulations. So, you know, we've got farmers who are already struggling to make a living from the land, and what we need to do is to make sure that we get them on board. So when Finn said that we're waiting for the Scottish Government to tell us, to me that's the wrong way around. We need to work with farmers to get their input on what needs to be done in order to make sure that they can farm in a sustainable way. And I think some of the things that have been adopted in England post the EU exit are actually detrimental. So if you do a lot of rewilding of areas, it sounds very positive, but actually it reduces the amount of area for agriculture and for agricultural practices and food production. So I think we need to hasten slowly, because whatever we do, it's got to have an impact for generations and not just a quick fix because we happen to have come out of Europe. So I think we need to get together with our farming communities that are very willing to come on board and change their practices, but they have to be helped to do so both through legislation, but also by us as consumers. So, you know, we can help by shopping locally, you know, looking at what we're buying in the, you know, when we go out to shop, whether that be vegetables or whether it be meat, you know, we can buy Scottish, we can buy British, and I think that there's nothing wrong with being patriotic when it comes to food because of the quality which we produce in this country.
Okay, thanks very much. So I've just been told we'll wait till we finish the questions before we go back to the students for a final response. So thanks for answering that one, and we'll move on to the next question, which is on transport, and it's coming from Emily.
Hello, so to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions, we need to switch to electric cars and use public transport and cycle paths more often. How will you support rural communities to move to greener transport options?
Thanks, Emily. So for this one, we'll start off with Finlay Carson.
Thanks. Really good question. We could probably talk all night about rural transport issues. You know, the very nature of it, it makes it difficult to address, but we have in the past had things like Ring and Ride, so that transport services can be more tailored around people when they need it and where they need to go. And digital connectivity can help with that, to make sure we have a system which takes cars or buses or whatever to where people need them the most. Electric vehicles may not be the answer, it may be hydrogen. But in Dumfries and Galloway, in the south of Scotland, we've got fantastic potential. We've got lots of renewable energy that's lost, that we produce, but then we can't feed into the grid. So there's a potential for that energy to be used to create hydrogen or charging points to allow driverless cars, which will be something that you'll all see in your lifetime, to help with transport with people who live in rural areas. Buses are not always the answer. We might see buses at the moment running with 1 or 2 people in it. So a more joined up approach using the Internet of Things, so digital connectivity to ensure that people can organise their lives without lots of buses and lots of cars. But I say in the south of Scotland, we've got this fantastic renewable energy resource. I would like to see local communities have hydrogen production on the back of the electricity that's not fed into the grid. We're also working more from home, so the old models of rural transport really don't work as well as they used to do. So we certainly need something that's transformational. So yeah, let's use the renewable energy that's there to create a better transport infrastructure.
Thank you. Next up is Mary.
Thanks, Finlay. So this is a topic really close to my heart. I grew up in rural Clydesdale, a young person relying on public transport that was too infrequent and far too expensive. I still like to think of myself as a young person in Clydesdale, incidentally. But I think what that means is that for those of us who are fortunate enough we end up resorting to private car use because there aren't bus stops that go past our house or train stations that we can easily walk or cycle to. And what that does is that means that too often young people in rural Scotland, they leave their homes, they leave for opportunities elsewhere, nearer uni, nearer college or jobs. And of course, for our older generation, it can lead to isolation and loneliness. So we absolutely have to tackle this, and we should do it in a way that helps us also tackle the climate emergency. So as well as changes to planning laws to facilitate more charging points for private electric vehicles, I want to see more public transport in rural Scotland powered by renewable sources like electricity and hydrogen, as Finlay mentioned. And I want to see these services be more frequent, reliable and affordable. And the SNP, we're already taking action. We're investing in building fleets of zero emissions buses. And we're currently taking a scheme through Parliament to provide free bus travel for all under 19s. So for me, it's low carbon trains and buses with more services, which are more affordable.
Thank you. Laura from the Greens next.
Yeah, thanks. I'm glad Mary mentioned the free bus travel for under 19s. That was a budget win for the Greens in the negotiations last year. And we have an aim to make free public transport for everybody in the same way that we have countries like Luxembourg have and Tallinn in Estonia, because until public transport is affordable and reliable, people are not going to switch to using it. And it is going to be essential even in rural areas. Most people I know who drive would more than happily take the train or the bus instead if they could get there and if they knew they would be able to get home again. So I've got a really long track record of campaigning against bus service cuts. I'd like to see buses back in public ownership. At the moment, the private sector creams off the most profitable routes and leaves the public sector subsidising the unprofitable ones. Actually, it probably wouldn't cost that much money in rural areas for the public sector to take on running all of them. Our Rail for All report a couple of weeks ago has been praised by transport experts in terms of looking at a radical infrastructure investment over the next 10 years in getting railway across Scotland, looking at every town with 5,000 people to see if they can get them on the network, and if not, to provide decent links to the rail network. And I think that's crucial. Young people, especially in rural areas, are really being left behind. And finally, as an electric car driver, I'd just say it is part of the solution, I think, especially in very remote rural areas, but it's not the whole solution. And I think we need to move away from hoping there's going to be a magic quick fix in terms of hydrogen, because we don't have time. It's not going to happen before 2030.
Yeah, I think Elon Musk might agree with you there. Moving on to Katrina from the Lib Dems.
Thank you very much. Well, I do think that the connectivity issue in rural areas is massive, and that does include improving digital connectivity. And actually, again, going back to trying to create local green jobs and local communities that are a little more self-sufficient, so that people don't feel the need to travel as much as we have done in the past. And one of the upsides of COVID, if there is such a thing, is that I think it's shown us how that can be done. And for young people in rural areas, there's always been a discrimination in terms of public transport. I grew up in a very rural village in the Scottish borders, and there were no buses. So it's great if there are greener buses, it's great if there's free travel, but if you can't get either of those, then it's no use at all. One of the things which we used to have, now this makes me sound like an old person, was post buses, and the post office still goes to all sorts of rural areas, and sometimes the solutions for the 21st century are ones which we dismantled in the 20th century. So I think looking at some innovative ideas around that would be great. Likewise, I agree with Laura, we had a fantastic rail network in Scotland up until Dr. Beeching came and took most of it up. So most of the rural communities around Peeblesshire, which you'll know of, like in Leithen, Walkerburn, there were trains there. And we made the mistake of taking them all up. So I would like to see a very ambitious infrastructure programme, a real infrastructure strategy for rural areas that would be green, but would also be reducing the inequalities that are faced in rural communities.
Perfect, thank you. Claudia is the final.
Thanks very much, Finlay. And if we don't have transport, it's really serious for rural communities. And perhaps that's stating the obvious, but it doesn't really seem to get anywhere. Very often there's still so much isolation, and I'm staying in rural Clydesdale, and although I didn't grow up here, my kids did, who are now grown up, and we were like a taxi service. We were lucky enough to have a car, but some people don't have a car, and we need good public transport. I'm very passionate about the possibilities of municipal bus services and taking the buses back into public ownership, and also to take the rail franchises into public ownership, so that absolutely clear from a Scottish Labour point of view that it must be the case that passengers and workers on our railways come first. And I think as well that the opening of more stations such as Reston, which happened, the green light was given to just this week, and there's a lot of feasibility studies and stag studies saying other stations are going to open, but stations and lines, extension of the Borders Railway, and demand-led buses, small buses, are really important. But also there's the possibility of car clubs. Some people need to have a car for all sorts of reasons, and as we move to electric cars, we need to have grants, and I'm absolutely clear about this as well, for people on lower incomes who can't afford the difference between a car and an electric car, and support for charging as well. But cars aren't really the answer unless you're very rural. What's important is integrated ticketing, free bus services for young people, and just being able to stay more in our communities is really important.
Thank you. Cool. So we'll go back to Emily to respond on that at the end of the 6 questions. What we'll do now is we'll move back to Keris, who will ask her second question, which is to do with the COP26.
The Paris Agreement was a landmark deal, but it hasn't led to the reduction in emissions required to keep the planet below a 1.5 degrees Celsius of global warming. Instead, emissions have continued to rapidly increase, and developed countries like the US and the UK have failed to lead the way. What policies will you advocate Scotland pushes for at the COP26 in Glasgow this year, so that over the next few years emissions are reduced?
Great question. So Mary will be first with this one.
Thank you, and thank you for the question. What an opportunity we've got. I think the most important thing we can get out of COP26 are concrete action plans and commitments for how countries are going to achieve what Paris told us we need to do. It's almost like Paris set the challenge and Glasgow must find the solutions. We need action, and we need it quickly. And the stakes are obviously very high. This is arguably our last chance to avoid the dire consequences of warming above 1.5. You've asked for specific policies. I mean, I would like to see no new coal-powered fired power stations. I'd like to see a ban on the clearing of rainforests anywhere in the world for agricultural production. And of course, COP26 is a massive opportunity for Scotland to showcase to the world that we've already set laws in line with Paris, and that we have the most ambitious framework in the world, and that just last month, the SNP government published an action plan with over 100 new ways to reach those goals. So we've got the ambition and we've got the action. And just finally, if I can, Finlay, as well as being a negotiation behind closed doors, I want to see COP26 be a chance for the voices of everyone who is too infrequently heard to be heard. So young people, you have been absolutely instrumental in the battle for climate action. I want to see you at the centre of COP26. I want to see women at the forefront, and I want those in the global south to be heard.
Thank you. Laura's next.
Yep. So as host nations, the Scottish and the UK government really must bring more than targets to the table if COP26 is going to be a success. We have to begin the transition from fossil fuels and think again on road expansion this year, and it would send a really positive message of leadership to other countries. We can't allow sponsors to dictate the terms. That's why the last COP failed to set actual plans rather than targets. The last people we want in the room at COP26 is the oil industry. Allowing powerful vested interests from the most damaging industries to lobby such a critical international summit would be dangerous when we have only 9 years left before the Paris Agreement deadline. And we have to make the Glasgow COP as inclusive as possible, especially for those in the most affected people, the most affected places, dealing with the impacts of the climate emergency. And it's the Green Movement leading efforts to make sure those voices are heard in Glasgow. To give you just a few policy areas, we need to commit to end oil and gas extraction, as Denmark has done. We need to end road expansion. We need to crack down on tax havens and free ports, which we're currently planning right here in Stranraer. We need to end subsidies for aviation, and we need to roll out free public transport. And there are already models in place for that in Estonia and in Luxembourg.
Thanks for mentioning aviation. I'll move on to Katrina next.
Thank you very much. I suppose one of the most significant things which is going to happen for the Glasgow conference is that we've got President Biden in charge of the US policy and no longer climate change denier President Trump. And I think when we talk about world leadership, it's incredibly important that all of those in strong leadership positions, whether that's in the US, whether it's in the UK or across Europe, have got to all be singing from the same hymn sheet. I mean, we've all got to, we signed the Paris Agreement, and then of course the US dropped out of it. So I think that's why there's been a bit of a lag. I think Mary's right, Scotland has got a really good record to promote at COP26. And I think that if we can also try and get some local examples, you know, Galloway, as you were saying, is the best place in the world to visit, and you've got a lot of really interesting projects which there's the UNESCO site, for example, which perhaps delegates could be taken out of Glasgow and to some of these locations to see some of the things which we've done in Scotland, rather than just being sort of in a big city. So I think that would be helpful. In terms of actual policies, there's a few being mentioned, but can we come to some agreement on penalties for actually failing to reach the targets? I'm all for having a carrot approach, but sometimes we need a bit of a stick as well. So that might be something worth looking at.
Okay, thanks. Claudia's next.
Sorry, this is the key question for the survival of our planet and our people, and it has to be done in a just way for the Global South. And I did work with SCIEF and other NGOs and communities to take forward in the Climate Change Act last year, the Global South must be really looked at in terms of what our policies are here in Scotland, whether it's the climate change plan or whatever it is, and that is absolutely fundamental. It's also really important that young people are involved, and I've had a lot of dialogue with young people, not least in Peebles, where I joined a climate strike, and so many really articulate young people, such as young Kira, who was 8, who was speaking at the demonstration there last year. And I think it's really fundamental that having been to Paris, there was a community hub there, but how are the voices heard? And if we think of women in the Global South, for instance, fair trade farmers who were on a video to the Scottish Parliament not too long ago, who were saying that actually they need the finance, they need the support, and there have to be financial structures that actually support the Global South, and also that it's fair to the Global South as we go forward. Otherwise, it will be nothing.
Yeah, yeah, thanks. Finlay Carson's last on this one.
Yeah, I really think it's a great idea to get people down into the south of Scotland from COP26. We are the birthplace of renewables. We had the first consented onshore wind farm, the first offshore wind farm, one of the oldest still operating hydro schemes. So we've got lots of great examples here. And people will come to Scotland and applaud the ambitious targets we have. However, what I would like to see at the COP26 is actually holding governments more responsible, and let's stop talking about airy-fairy stuff, because, you know, if we look at the record of the SNP government over the last few years. The 2021 landfill ban's been delayed. The 2013 recycling targets have not met, and recycling rates are lower than they were in 2016. Biodiversity targets are not being met. 13 out of 20 of the AKI targets on biodiversity we're failing on. 16 out of 30 of the SNP's own biodiversity indicators are getting worse or stagnating. So we need to make sure that we can all be ambitious, but we need to make sure that governments are actually carrying out what they're saying. You know, we still export something like 3 tons of waste every minute abroad, and only 2% of plastics are recycled in Scotland. So, you know, it's not good that we are potentially turning all our waste and incinerating it. That's increased by 400%. That's not a good record. So we can trumpet about all the great ambitions we've got, but we actually need a government that's going to deliver on its ambitions, and we're not getting that at the moment.
Yep, we definitely need shorter term targets as well, I'd say. That's great, thank you. So we're going to move on to back to Emily, who's going to ask a question related to energy and oil and gas.
To fight climate change, we need to reduce our consumption of fossil fuels, which means investing in renewable energies and replacing existing gas boilers with heat pumps powered by green electricity. How soon do you think we can stop extracting North Sea oil and gas, and how would you achieve this?
Great, thank you. And we're going to start this time with Laura up first.
Yep, so in December, Denmark set a target to end extraction of oil and gas by 2050. Personally, I feel that's a little bit too late, but in Scotland, we're already behind the curve. And that's because the UK and Scottish governments have set targets to maximise oil and gas extraction. They're obliging companies to get as much as they can out of the North Sea. So we need to descale that. The IPPR has recommended declining 5-year targets to achieve that. Again, I'm worried that might be too little too late, but at least it would be a start rather than the current situation where we're still pushing for more. Obviously, this needs to be a just transition. People work in these sectors, they're good quality, well-paid jobs. We've already seen in Aberdeen the impact of losing oil revenue and the boom and bust cycle that's triggered. So we really need to re-employ and train people to work in other industries. As Finlay said earlier, Scotland is incredibly well placed to take advantage of renewable energies. The co-leader of the Scottish Green Party is a renewable energy engineer who specialises in marine energy. And I think that is an area where we can really expand what we do, make the most of our coastline. And I'd also like to see more investment in small scale renewables that would help to spread the wealth and those jobs throughout the country. The project I'm working on in Dumfries is looking at tapping into an underwater aquifer to provide heating, sort of ground source heat system really for the buildings in the town centre. And there's no reason systems like that can't be applied everywhere.
Interesting, thank you. And it's Katrina next.
Thanks very much. I mean, clearly the oil and gas industry has been key to Scotland's economy for decades. So it does have to be looked at very carefully. We can't just throw people out of jobs, even though it would be advantageous to the climate. We do have to do it in a structured way. And I do think that the key lies in reskilling people into green jobs. One of the greatest resources we have in Scotland is water. I think we all know that there's plenty of water in Scotland, and I think that this is an area which is completely underexploited in terms of looking at the energy potential which we could take, whether it be in hydro schemes, which again we were at the forefront of maybe 100 years ago in Scotland, and that seems to have dissipated. So I think that we can promote that. I think we also need to be very careful that when we're looking at new forms of energy, for example, hydrogen gets mentioned a lot, but it has very significant CO2 emissions. So unless we can square that circle in terms of the production, then we don't want to be getting rid of one polluting fossil fuel industry and then replacing it with another. So we will have to stop oil and gas, but we do have to offer people an alternative because our economy depends on it, but also our climate depends on getting it right.
Perfect, thanks very much. Claudia's next.
Thanks very much, Finlay. And this is one of the key questions, and I'm not avoiding it by saying this, but let's forget that also buildings and transport have very, very high emissions. But the oil and gas industry is something, as a member of the labour movement, I've grappled with how we shift to renewable energy in a way which enables workers and affected communities to not only be brought along, but also to have good paying conditions. And in the Climate Change Act, I took through an amendment which enabled us to focus on the just transition principles, but was disappointed, frankly, that the SNP government didn't accept that the Just Transition Commission, which is now going to end as it stands in March, in a month's time, as if when we've got to get to net zero, that was not put on a statutory long-term footing, because it's vitally important that we continue to work with the unions and with businesses to transfer the people who and the businesses onto the footing of renewable energy, offshore, onshore, and that we have more public ownership, and that we make sure that this is done really quickly. And the way to do it quickly is to have the skills as well, the transferable skills and the lifelong skills that can be developed. So we need to go for it really fast.
Thank you. Finlay Carson up next.
Thank you. Yeah, it's a really difficult topic. I think we've got to remember that oil and gas that extracted from the North Sea, which is such an important part of our economy, it's not all extracted to burn. It is extracted for other products which are really important in everyday life. And we need to look at how those products, once they're made, last far longer as we have this just transition, as Claudia said. But one thing we need to do is we've got to set targets to allow people to invest and have some confidence in the direction the governments are taking. So we've just seen a government who voted, the SNP government, vote against binding targets for heat networks. Well, heat networks are a fantastic way of reducing our consumption of oil and gas, and they voted against targets. We also need to see a transition in jobs and skills. And again, this SNP government promised 28,000 jobs, green jobs, by 2020, but would have created less than 2,000. They put something in the budget for the creation of a Green Skills Academy. That's fantastic. And I want to see that academy down here in Dumfries and Galloway in the south of Scotland to grow our expertise that we have at the moment. We already have a lot of jobs. The natural power look after something like 28% of all the wind farms in the whole of the UK. And that's from a building in the Galloway Hills. So I want to see the government invest far more in creating green jobs and transitioning those people from the North Sea oil industry for producing oil to burn in cars and heating to create energy, to use that for far more long-term sustainable methods and transfer that workforce.
Thank you. That's your time up. Could we go on to Mari next, please?
Yeah, thank you. I'll just start by saying I think that maybe Finlay Carson should spend less time bemoaning the SNP and more time talking to his colleagues in Westminster who are opening coal mines. But there you go. I'm committed to climate justice. I'm also committed to social justice, to fairness, and to governments not taking action which exacerbates injustice or harms communities. So although we need to take radical action on the climate, we need to do it in a way that doesn't pull the rug from under the feet of those families whose income is dependent on the North Sea. We can't do to our oil and gas workers today what was done to coal miners and steel workers in the 80s and 90s. It would just offshore emissions and it would devastate communities in Scotland. So in the SNP, we're committed to a just transition. The others have talked about it. We've got a really important path to walk. We need to walk it together. We need to leave nobody behind. So that means planning and finding a way to transition our highly skilled oil and gas workers into low carbon jobs in industries, renewables and hydrogen production. So for me, Emily, we need to end extraction and we need to do it as soon as we can help those workers to transition. And you mentioned boilers. Just as a point to note, last week, 2 weeks ago, the SNP announced £1.6 billion to transform the way that we heat our homes. This will reduce emissions, tackle fuel poverty, and create thousands of good green jobs.
Thank you. Right, that's everybody on that question. And I think we're going to move on to a final question from Ruby. on climate education?
Okay. Many people feel as though they lack a good understanding of the science behind climate change. We aren't taught about environmental issues or the potential solutions as a core topic in the school curriculum. What would your party do to address this?
Perfect, thanks. And we're back to starting with Katrina.
Thank you very much. Well, I do think that the climate change is one of the areas where we absolutely must listen to the experts and we must follow the evidence. I know that experts and evidence have got a bad name politically over the past few years, but now is the time where we've got to enable that to go forward into our education system and to make sure that young people do understand. I mean, young people know more about this than the rest of us. I mean, they're really consumed by it because their futures depend on it. But we do have to make sure that when we review the curriculum, which I think will happen after the next elections, that we take the sort of lobbying which has been brought forward by the young people and make sure that it's integrated into the curriculum, so that we're talking about climate change not just as a distinct subject, but that it's integrated into all subjects and into the way that we teach, right from early years education all the way through the education system. And in particular, we need to develop apprenticeships and we need to develop skills academies for those green jobs for the future, which will be absolutely crucial. And we have to make sure that our school buildings, as we build them in the future, are zero emissions, passive house standards, so that, again, you know, we're not only just teaching young people about what the climate crisis is, but we're actually walking the walk as well.
Thank you. Claudia, can you add to that?
Yeah, I hope I can. Thanks, Finlay. I think this is where, I mean, it probably won't be the last question, but it's the last of the preset questions. And I think that the Future Speaks own aims are absolutely fundamental in this, and that really that the climate and nature emergencies have to be at the heart of all aspects of the curriculum. I mean, if I take an example, why shouldn't we have a book like the wonderful Monarch Butterfly book that is written by Barbara Pinsova as part of the literature that pupils study or students study, you know. And but I think these things, it's difficult because in Scotland the curriculum for excellence is really done by a lot of experts, but I think really the experts are those who are aware of what they need to know for the future. And I think that there must be vocational training and in-service training for teachers that actually really obliges there to be this way of integrating everything into the curriculum, and that it'll be really fundamental that there's a vocational training certificate for that, which is one of your other asks. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you. Finlay Carson.
Yeah, I agree with everything Claudia says, and I'm glad to see that you speak. Future Speak has raised this. We in the past we've had organisations like RET, the Royal Highland Educational Trust, which have tried to bring the farms into school to try and show how agriculture and rural industries play a massive part in people's lives and showcase the opportunities there is to work in that sector. And in the Scottish Parliament, in the committee that Claudia and I sit on, we've also been at pains to stress how important climate change should be embedded in every committee in the Parliament. It should be part of every single piece of legislation that we look at. It needs to be. I've advocated for rural proofing legislation, and it's something that I would like to see brought forward. But certainly, I think there's a case for climate proofing legislation to look at the impact, and we have gone some way to achieving that in the Scottish Parliament. But when it comes to education, we need to start right at the very beginning to ensure that it's very much part of the curriculum, and it doesn't have to be a subject on its own. It needs to run, and there needs to be a thread of climate change running through everything we do, and appreciate all our actions will have a positive or negative impact on the climate. Thanks.
Thank you. Mary's next.
Thank you. So I'm only 27 years old. It was only about 10 years ago that I was at Biggar High School. And at that point, climate, it wasn't taught. 10 years later, my wee sister is 17. She's at Biggar High School. She attends climate strikes, and I don't think she feels that she sees it reflected in her studies. And I think that for her and for a lot of other young people, that leads to a sort of what I've heard described as eco-anxiety, where you are so aware of the dangers that the whole world is facing, but you don't hear it being discussed and you don't see it being integrated into your learning. And that's really, really difficult. Claudia mentioned it, our education system in Scotland is not prescribed. It is designed to be flexible. We do have learning for sustainability already built in, but I agree with Claudia on the training point. I have no doubt that we can do more and we need to work together. And I'd just like to say that, you know, your generation have done a brilliant job in fighting for climate action. And it's not just climate, it's big issues facing the world. It's racism, it's sexual identity. You're leading the way and I'm grateful for that, but it shouldn't be on your shoulders. It's too big a burden to hold. So I want you to know you're not alone. And in me, you have a candidate who will work with you on that. Thanks.
And Laura finishing up for this one.
Yeah, I think it's been actually really interesting answers, and I'd echo a lot of what was said about embedding it throughout the curriculum. My experience of education in Scotland has mostly been through my children and mostly primary, and I've been quite pleased actually by the level of engagement and information they've had about not just the climate emergency, but the nature emergency and the need for biodiversity and appreciating the environment around them. I think we need to work harder at further education and higher education level, where it seems a bit of a nice to have. But also, Claudia Finlay and I all sit on the stewarding group for the Climate Assembly, Citizens Climate Assembly. They've got a website, climateassembly.scot, and they have some really great materials from that, videos that have been really eye-opening and really great intros to the basics of climate science. And I think we need to work on educating the adult population more than we need to work on the young people who really get this. I think we need to give more support to climate strikers and the Fridays for Future people to actually attend and take part in those sessions, especially in rural areas. And finally, I think we need emotional intelligence and education to help people to deal with the reality of the climate crisis, both in terms of grieving for the lives we are losing, literally and figuratively in terms of lifestyle, and just coping with that. So I'd like to see more emphasis on that, as well as teaching about science.
Thanks, guys. Good answers. Right. But what we're going to do now is we've been looking at lots of questions coming in with the Q&A. Lots of them, we won't be able to get through them, but we're going to go for two that we've particularly selected. So we're going to return to Keris, who's going to ask the first of those.
I'm having some connection issues briefly.
Okay, well, what can we go to Emily then to ask yours?
I don't know where I'm supposed to read this question from.
What we could do is ask Anna, are you able to put it in the chat? Either one, and we'll take a look. Okay, so a report from McKinsey's International Business Consultant states that we need to be reforesting an area the size of Iceland, 1.25 times Scotland every year by 2030, in any scenario where we avoid overshooting Paris targets. What changes to land use in South Scotland would you propose in order to help with this? Now, just to say with this one, we want quick fire answers for like about 30 seconds, so try and be really short and concise, please. What we'll do is we'll start with Claudia on this one.
Yeah, thanks for the question, and thanks, Finlay. I think integrated land use strategy is absolutely fundamental. I think community woodlands are really important. I've spent far too long trying to support communities where they should, if they want community woodlands, they should be allowed to have them and have the support for them. And I think agroforestry is, well, it's a great passion of mine to make sure that there is integrated work to plant trees, and this will bring jobs, and it'll also bring well-being for people. It's not only in the country, it's in urban areas as well, to help create green spaces, and you never know, we may even have some orchards as well.
Thank you, and on to Finlay next.
If we're talking about land use in particular, we need to ensure we have the right tree in the right place. Far too often we see massive Sitka plantations and there's maybe 10, 15, 20% broadwood. We need to have regard broadwood as a valuable part of that plantation because the carbon sequestration of hardwood is far more. We need to develop timber technologies so that the timber that we do plant in the future isn't burnt or for short-term use, it's used for long-term building projects and whatever. So we need innovation when it comes to using wood and using broadleaf natural woodland as part of that.
Thanks. Mary's next.
Thank you. Well, I think that one of the first things that we could do is try and address the very strange system of land ownership that we have in Scotland, whereby great swathes of land are owned by one individual or a company. So we need land reform, we need more land in the ownership of communities, and we need support for communities to help them to use their land for planting trees if they wish to, or for renewable projects, or for affordable housing projects, particularly in rural Scotland, so that young people can stay and make their lives and careers there.
Thank you. Laura's next.
Yeah, where I live in Dumfries and Galloway, forestry accounts for about 40% of the land use, which is roughly average for Europe. So other areas need to emulate the quantity, but definitely not the quality of woodlands in Dumfries and Galloway, where it is primarily Sitka spruce mass plantations, which are going to be cut down in a few years. Totally agree about land reform and about the need for community woodlands. Much more pockets of small scale woodlands would be great. And grouse moors, they're an absolute waste of space. We could do almost anything with that land that would be better. There's no earthly reason they couldn't be planted with trees.
Thank you. Katrina.
Yeah, I totally agree. It's got to be the right type of tree. And in terms of looking at where we might plant, I think that tree planting could make an enormous contribution to flood prevention. So we could actually tackle two things at the same time because they would then draw up some of the water. So I think we need to look at how we would integrate both our tree planting and our flood protection measures. That's a quick answer.
Thank you. Final, actually, we started with Claudia, didn't we? So that's everyone answered that one. So yeah, the next question is from Keris.
Do you think 2050 is soon enough to be to reach net zero carbon emissions?
Yeah, so is 2050 targets good enough? So we'll start on this one with Finlay Carson and quick fire questions, answers again, please. Thanks.
There's
Put yourself on mute, yeah.
We've got very ambitious targets, but the recent Climate Change Committee chair said that they were on the verge of not being achievable. So we really need to bring forward achievable policies as quick as possible. Stop talking about it. Stop telling everybody how wonderful we are as a Scottish government, and actually get the policies on the ground so everybody can start doing their bit to address it. And yep, I think we can get to 2050 and hit our targets, but we need to stop talking about it and start doing.
Thank you. Mary, respond to that.
Yeah, glad to, thank you. So I said in the chat box, I think 2050 has to be the absolute latest for the world, but in Scotland we already have the target for 2045 that we're on track to meet. And I would just point everybody to the climate change plan that we've just published, over 100 new ways to meet those all important targets that we've set.
Thank you. And Katrina's next.
Well, it's interesting that Dumfries and Galloway Council and Borders Council have declared a climate emergency and are going for net zero by 2025. So the Scottish Government's got a bit of competition on its hands. And, you know, if that's the kind of competition we're going to have between local government and national government, then I'm all for that, because I think that the more we push for this and the more we take it down to the most local level, the more likely we are going to achieve the target. But 2050 seems a long way off. So yes, the sooner the better.
Thank you. And I realised I missed Laura. So Laura, you can go next. Apologies.
It's okay. 2030 is the target in Paris for when climate change is irreversible. So any emissions after that are largely pointless. And also there's been no plan to actually meet these targets. We've missed all the old targets. We were supposed to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 37% by 2020, and we missed it. We've missed air pollution targets. We've broken the legal limit for water pollution. We've missed 14 of the 19 biodiversity targets. 50% of household waste recycling should be recycled or reused by last year. We're not hitting the targets that we're setting. We need a plan to get there and not more targets.
Great. Claudia, your final on this one?
Right, thanks. I think that it was difficult for all the parties, if I may say so, to reach the 2030 target of 75%, and especially when the UK Committee on Climate Change had actually said that was really stretching us too far, and that happened in the Climate Change Act. I think 2045 is too late. It is really important that we push harder, and I actually think that if we have a climate change update plan that actually has pathways for all the very good policies and proposals that the Scottish Government has taken forward, and there was an announcement of a district heating, of heating of buildings one today. If we get them for everything, I think we can do it, and I think we can get there earlier, and I think we must. Thank you.
Yeah, we definitely must. Okay, so what we'd like to do now is, we've heard from all you guys. Let's return to the panelists and see what they think about your answers. So could we go with Ruby first? Will that work?
Yeah, is my audio working okay now?
Just about, yeah, I can hear that good.
Okay, so thank you to everyone who came tonight. Thank you to Finlay for chairing, and thank you to the politicians for answering our questions. It was really interesting hearing everyone's perspectives, and although they differed, I think we all agreed that climate change is a big issue. In some ways it made me more optimistic, hearing you all having plans and agreeing that we have to make changes. However, in other ways it's made me more worried, because I guess it implies that politicians already do know that climate change is a big issue, and that means that the reason we haven't acted isn't because of a lack of knowledge or awareness, but rather something more sinister and harder to fix. I just want to say that when we look back at this moment in 20 or 50 years' time, we won't really remember how hard, how expensive, or how inconvenient reducing CO2 emissions was. What we will remember is whether we as humanity, as a country, or even as an individual, did what we could to prevent climate change. And if we don't act now, there won't really be anything we can say in the future that will justify us failing to stop a problem we were fully aware of. There's not really any excuse for not using your political power to fight for a planet. You have a much bigger influence and platform than most people, and it would be a waste not to use it. What you have said tonight has made me hopeful, but hope isn't really enough at the moment. We need you to take what you said and turn it into action.
Great, thank you. I could hear you well. That was good. Thank you very much. Keris, or
yeah. So thank you all for coming tonight. During these difficult times, it's vital we keep the conversation about the climate emergency going to make sure the issue is not forgotten. This is why I'm so glad to see that everyone's come tonight. However, hopeful words mean nothing without action. For decades, we have been warned by scientists that our rising carbon emissions will have a global impact, yet governments and politicians have ignored these warnings and continued to support the fossil fuel industry. To put it simply, governments have failed. But there is still a chance to fix this. We are standing on the edge of a cliff, and the choices we make in the next couple of years will determine my generation's future and the future of the planet. All eyes are now on you to help make the right decisions.
thanks very much. And Emily, what do you think?
Hi, I'd first like to just respond to the answers you gave to some of my questions. I wanted to say it was really fantastic to hear about you all talking about expanding the public transport network and focusing on making this reliable, affordable, and most importantly, green. And I really hope whoever gets elected will put these plans into action, because this would really help the fight of climate change. I also think we all agreed on the importance to stop extracting oil and carbon, but I do really appreciate how relying on the Scottish economy and Scottish employment is on this. This is why I think it's so important that we start to plan ahead, start to plan today how we're going to gradually, with short-term targets, reduce our reliance on oil and gas, so that, as you all said, we can transfer our highly skilled oil workers to the green industry. I believe that the more we invest in green technologies, the more we'll start to see feedback into our current economy and into our current employment, as the green industry does offer promises of more jobs. And I think it'd be great for Scotland to get ahead on that. For as long as I remember, I've been concerned about climate change. As a kid, I always thought it'll be fine. The grown-ups will fix it. They always do. But now I'm not so sure. I've been on quite a few climate strikes now, most of the time standing in the freezing cold, holding a sulky cardboard sign. Every time I think, this is the one, they're gonna listen to us. This time, there's more of us. This time, we're marching. This time, they've got to listen to us. And every time, I feel just as disheartened as the last. That's why this event has been so important for me tonight, and it's amazing to have a chance to talk to you and hear your responses. 2020 has been hard for us all, but it's given me hope in many ways. Firstly, I've seen that in a global emergency, we can pull together and make the necessary changes to get through. And secondly, I've seen the power of the youth voice. Youth votes were key to electing Biden as president, leading to the US rejoining the Paris deal. I know that youth votes will be important and will make a difference in the upcoming Scottish election. And I hope those elected care about climate change as much as we do, and will work to put plans in action that will fight climate change. So thank you so much for being here tonight, and thank you so much to everyone who organised it. I hope to see what we've talked about tonight put into action, and I hope this is only the start.
Great, thank you very much. Very powerful from all three of you. And I would just like to say, I can't add that much more to that, but I just think I want to say thank you particularly to the three panelists who I've worked closely with over the past few weeks. We've put so much energy and enthusiasm and passion into formulating those questions. We've engaged climate scientists, we've engaged specialists in domestic heating and all sorts of stuff. And just like the level of interest that these people that are still in school are showing about these subjects is just really inspiring. Just in terms of like, as the politicians as well, I think it's great we're all engaging, we're all on the same page. And I think just the tone and the way that this conversation's been had is really good. We're saying the right things in terms of the issues. I would say, I think where we differ is the solutions, and particularly the short-term solutions, the next few years. I thought it was really interesting. On recycling, we're still discussing recycling, basic plastic. Like outside my house right now, I've got one black bin. Like, we need to do better than that. On agriculture, really interesting. We still seem to be talking up meat when even the lowest impact, yes, Scotland might be better than Amazon rainforest. We still import a lot of soy from the Amazon and use it in Scotland. And even the lowest impact livestock is higher impact than, plant-based diets as well. So we really need to be thinking about that and taking farmers with us. It's interesting, some of you mentioned hydrogen. Just a fact on that, most hydrogen today is not produced from green sources, it's produced from fossil fuel. And just shout out to the young kids, just focus on what politicians say with that. If they're talking about blue hydrogen rather than green hydrogen, hold them to account. Also, that comes back to the transport part as well, talking about hydrogen. Is that really the right solution? What are the timescales on that? What's going to happen this decade? And yeah, on the kind of land use, deforestation, why are we still talking about biofuels? And particularly in the aviation industry, that's a topic that's very close to my heart. So yeah, I just want to say thanks to all the panelists. Thanks to everyone that's been sending in questions. We've had them from primary, secondary, university, so much engagement and so much passion. So let's continue that forwards. Let's ramp it up. We've still got 6 more events. So if you know people in other areas of Scotland, you've enjoyed this event, please encourage them to come to the one in West Scotland in a couple of weeks' time. And yeah, so I just want to finish basically by saying thanks to all the behind the scenes people. We've got Lily, Anna, and Kyle, who have been putting in a massive shift, and they're not seen. So thanks very much to them. And yeah, I think we can end it there. And yeah, as someone just said in the chat, see you at COP. Thank you, and have a good evening. Enjoy your weekend.
Thanks, everyone.